D. Michael Quinn will long be remembered as one of the most prominent historians of Mormonism. Born and raised in Southern California, he taught history at Brigham Young University after earning his PhD at Yale. He is the author of many groundbreaking articles and several books on Mormon history, including his 3-volume Mormon Hierarchy series, Elder Statesman, a Biography of J. Reuben Clark, and Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, for which he won the Mormon History Association's Best Book Award in 1988. He received the Herbert Feist Award from the American Historical Association for his 1996 study, Same-Sex Dynamics Among 19th Century Americans, a Mormon Example. In 2016, the Mormon History Association gave him the Leonard J. Arrington Award for Outstanding and Distinguished Service in Mormon History. Written before his 2021 death, Quinn's compelling new memoir, titled Chosen Path, was just published by Signature Books. Quinn, a believing Latter-day Saint, recognizes in his memoir the subconscious factors operating in his efforts to discover and reveal uncomfortable truths about his church's history, namely his relationship with himself as a closeted gay man, his relationship with his oft-absent and secretive Mexican-American father, and his relationship with the church not yet ready to grapple with controversial aspects of its own identity. Our guests today include an exciting lineup of panelists here to share their insights on this remarkable new memoir. Welcome to the Signature Books podcast. I'm Barbara Jones-Brown, Director of Signature Books Publishing, and we are so excited to have with us today 3 very special guests talking about the newly released memoir by D. Michael Quinn titled Chosen Path. Our first guest is Moshe Quinn, Mike's youngest child, who lives in the Bay Area, where he's an educator in the arts, and like his father, he loves the humanities. Welcome, Moshe. We also have with us Sara Patterson, Professor of Theological and Gender Studies at Hanover College, and the recent author of the recently published The September 6th and the Struggle for the Soul of Mormonism, which came out in September from Signature Books. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you.
Last and but not least, we have with us the amazing Troy Williams, who is Executive Director of Equality Utah. Equality Utah is the leading LGBTQ political advocacy organization in Utah. And he was a friend of Michael's, and he looked up to Mike Quinn. So we're so grateful to have all of you here. And all of you have read the book, of course. And so excited to have this discussion. So Moshe, maybe we could start off with you telling the story about the background behind this remarkable discovery of your dad's memoir, which he had written before he passed away in 2021.
Well, yeah, there's a long story there, really. The discovery aspect of it is the fact that when he passed away, people were inquiring with me initially, I think because I had written the obituary. And maybe that's why I was fielding some questions or getting some inquiries from people as we were in touch with people and people were in touch with us. And somebody had asked me within a couple of days of his passing something about the memoirs and having some interest in his memoirs. And for me at that time, in that moment, I wasn't exactly sure what that was, although I was aware of like autobiographies or some drafts of autobiographical material that our father had worked on, but I wasn't sure like what like the memoirs were per se. But that was mainly like my blip of a radar, or sort of like my subjective sense of things. There was a general awareness of his memoirs. Our sister Mary, for example, his oldest child, knew very well all about the memoirs. He was in touch with her a little bit more about his memoir writing. And there was a draft of it in 2010 that he had completed as being like finished, that he shared with her. And much later, I realized that he had mailed me a CD-ROM, just like he emailed, sorry, not emailed, but just like he mailed a CD-ROM to all of us kids that had his memoirs on them, the 2010 version of it. I found that in storage, sometime later. So he had been in touch with all of us with his CD-ROM. I was, just busy with my life and put it somewhere in storage and then didn't have a look at it. Just forgot that it was there. And Lisa, perhaps it was something similar for my sister Lisa. But Mary was much more on her radar. She had read passages and excerpts of it, previous to that time, before 2010. He was in touch with her more. They were in conversation about it. But completely off my radar, by 2021. So when questions were coming up about the memoirs, I just wasn't really sure what that was. But Mary had a really good idea about it. And, there was this laptop that he had from, I don't know, it looks like it was from the late 90s, but it kind of feels like it was from the late 80s. This very, very heavy laptop, a PC system that, we knew any documents that were important to him would be on that device. And, as you're going through personal effects and just sorting through all the things, and, that was definitely like an item on the list to get to, but it took some time. And he was a WordPerfect devotee, never really graduated beyond WordPerfect. And so there was this technical step and process that we had to engage in to convert these WordPerfect files, which were really kind of like gobbledygook if we tried to open them up on like my system or anyone's system for that matter. And so there was some arcane process that we had to engage in to convert, these WordPerfect files so that they're actually legible. So that was another step in this process of sorting through things and actually just trying to see what files were what and what they had to offer, what they were all about. So there was a process of discovery in all of that.
Yeah. So eventually you brought that manuscript or that digital version of your dad's memoir to Gary Bergera, my predecessor at Signature Books, and asked Signature to publish it. So can you explain why you asked Signature to publish your dad's memoirs?
Well, it seemed like the right home and the right fit with our father's long history with Signature Books. And I was aware of Signature Books since I guess I was 13 or 14, like as publications were coming out of our father. Signature was a household name in our household because of his association with the press. And it seemed like Signature had the right audience and the right the right audience and the right not viewership, but the right audience and the right fit, in terms of like,
well, yeah, we are
readers.
so honored to be publishing your dad's work, as we've published many of his books. Most of his books, besides two, I believe, we've published at Signature, which we've been so honored to do. And so we are so honored now to continue to publish one more book by D. Michael Quinn. So we're grateful that you brought that to us, Moshe. And so this is where I came in. So when I became director of Signature Books less than 2 years ago, the first manuscript that Gary Bergera, my predecessor, brought to me was this memoir written by your father. And I was stunned. I had no idea that Michael Quinn had written a memoir. And I was so excited about that. And so I think I tweeted about that. And then Troy, you saw, do you remember how you responded when I said, hey, there's this memoir we're going to be publishing by Michael Quinn?
I was just thrilled because I thought, of course, Mike wrote his biography, and he, I think all Latter-day Saints have a sense of their contribution to history, and of course, he of all Latter-day Saints would, and so I was thrilled to know that we had one more gift coming from Mike.
Yeah, and I loved seeing that tweet from you because I didn't realize that you were friends with Mike. I didn't realize you'd have that relationship with him. So it was neat to find out that you were excited to hear this was coming forth too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And then Sarah Patterson, do you want to talk about how, I think just you briefly met Mike a couple of times, but your relationship with Michael Quinn and his work?
Sure. I met Mike in graduate school. He was a friend of one of my professors. They both wrote LGBT history. And so I was introduced to him as someone interested in studying gender and sexuality and also Mormon studies. And I just remember Mike being one of the warmest and most welcoming people. He was asking me questions about my work and interested in hearing about what I was doing, even as a graduate student who didn't really know what she was doing. And so I just remember him as being a giant in the field and also a very inviting and warm person.
Right. And so you spoke, there was a conference, a Quinn conference dedicated to the legacy of D. Michael Quinn held at the University of Utah in March of 2022, I believe. And you were one of the speakers there. And of course, Signature took all of those presentations and turned it into an anthology titled DNA Mormon: Perspectives on the Legacy of Historian D. Michael Quinn. So you presented there and of course have an essay in that very important book. Tell us about how you ended up speaking at that conference. And
I was invited to speak by Ben Park, who organized the conference and who also edited the collection. And I was interested in participating because of how much I always admired Mike. And one of the things that I investigated in my own paper was how we tend to tell stories about his life. And part of what I was arguing is that the way people have narrated his life in the past has tended to be using the measuring stick of the church. And so seeing the early parts of his life where he was in a heterosexual marriage, had children, was teaching at BYU as on a trajectory to bigger and better things. And then often those narratives then look at his life after his excommunication as one of, I think, loss and drift. And I was arguing that we need to have a more complex understanding of the communities that he built, the relationships that he had after his excommunication.
thank you, Sarah. And I was very impressed and moved by your presentation and your argument there. So let's talk about Michael Quinn's private life and a part of himself that he is so forthcoming about. And, you know, he was more of a private person. I think we would all agree with that, you know, publicly. But privately in this memoir, he really just opens up and shares his innermost thoughts and feelings and experiences, particularly with his family. So Moshe, as one of Mike's sons, what did it mean to you and to your family to read through, be able to read your dad's memoir and read his accounting of his life in his own words?
Well, I mean, there's a lot there. A lot of, I mean, as far as like the meaning of the memoirs to our family goes, I think a lot of what comes up when I talk to my sisters, and you know, we have our different thoughts and feelings, of course, but there is this feeling of like a sense that we've had over the years of his you know, his excommunication, and I'm not sure if marginalization is the right word exactly, but like a sense of tension and fraughtness, you know, in terms of his experiences in the church. And with his excommunication and like the heartbreak that we saw that was for him, there was a lot of the thought that we've carried over the years is this sense of his being, I'm not sure, like maybe misunderstood is one word. Yeah, misunderstood maybe captures it best. I mean, there are other words that I could bring into that as well, but you know, a sense of his like being misunderstood, his dedication, his faith, his commitment to the church, which was really like a life value and a life calling, certainly for him, and how it led to that felt really awful for him, we know, but then also awful for us, you know, as we thought about him and our feelings and our regard for him. You know, we had this sense of his his being shut out in ways that weren't fair or didn't feel fair or just felt awful, in some ways. And so his publication of the memoir, that's like a part of like the meaning for us really is his being able to tell his story in his way, and being personal and bringing people into that journey and that struggle, and the series of struggles, like struggles with his sexual identity since he was very young, and how that informs his experiences as a faithful Mormon, and how that informs his experiences as a determined historian, someone who's pursuing the truth, even the ugly truth, or the truth warts and all, as he would often say. So the memoir it feels like a really important piece of his voice coming to the foreground and being heard, his story being visible, his life being visible, his struggle being visible in ways that we saw, and also we didn't see all of it, right? Because he was reticent in his own ways. He was a protective father, in very natural ways, especially for his generation, but also, I don't know, his character and his own experiences. He wasn't sharing a lot with us, but we saw pain, certainly. We saw struggle, and we were aware of that and felt a lot, about that. So his memoirs coming out, like I said, feels really great for us in that picture of his voice, being present in his story, being present in his own words to everybody.
Well, I think I'm so grateful again that your family, you could have just taken this memoir and just published it for the family if you wanted, printed it for the family, but instead you've chosen to share it with all of us, to share it with the world and let Mike's voice be heard. So very much appreciate that. Maybe we could go to Troy now and just talk about what that memoir, you've read it now, what it has meant to you as a leader in the LGBTQ community, and what you think the memoir will mean to your community.
Well, on a personal note, I just want to honor Mike and really recognize the very personal way that he saved me in a very significant way. He helped pull me out of my own drift toward extreme right-wing politics and even fundamentalism. So in the early 90s, when I moved to Utah and I had just returned from my mission to England, was so scared to be gay that I ran to the thing that was farthest from, and I joined the Utah Eagle Forum. And it was and so Gail Ruzicka, who's one of the leading anti-LGBT crusaders in the state, she was then and is now, she became like a mentor to me. And I worked in the Eagle Forum alongside Janet Russin, who you might know is the psychic who allegedly channels Nephi for Tim Ballard. And it was in this era there was this fever of millennialism and prepper panic. And I was kind of swept up in that. That was the milieu that I was a part of. And it was I really, truly believe, looking back, it was a way of sublimating my sexuality. And I had all these questions about early Mormon history, and nobody within the mainstream LDS church would really answer or entertain my questions, except for Mormon fundamentalists. And they would talk all day to me about plural marriage and the Adam God doctrine and the political kingdom of God. And so I actually went to attend a sacrament service for the Apostolic United Brethren, which is kind of nestled in between Utah and Salt Lake County. And this is sometimes called the All Red Group. And it was kind of an awkward place to be because I was this nascent gay, and the idea of having one wife was inconceivable, let alone 3 or 4. But I was trying to figure this out. And when I went to the AUB, after their service, they announced, "Hey, stick around because we're going to have a fireside by a scholar named D. Michael Quinn." I didn't know who he was. And so he got up and he delivered this speech or a talk that he had given about Mormon political conflicts. It sort of explored the tension between Ezra Taft Benson and Hugh B. Brown. And I was immediately captivated because Benson was then the prophet, and he's one of the reasons that I was drawn to right-wing politics. And I wanted to follow the prophet, which meant exploring his kind of right-wing views. But Mike offered a completely different take, which offered layers of complexity that I hadn't considered. And so the next day I rushed to Deseret Book in Orem, and I found the last copy of Dialogue. It may have been the last copy that Deseret Book ever sold, but it had his speech and its endless footnotes. And it was my first really exposure to dialogue and a kind of academic approach to history that literally provided me a lifeline and a path out of political extremism. And so I went out and I tried to find every book from Michael Quinn I could get, every article. And finally I met him at Sunstone and like begged to go out to like, you know, meet with him, which he allowed me to, which began our lifetime friendship. And so I think that Mike provided that lifeline to so many people, and specifically to the LGBT community. I mean, this is his writings about his book on same-sex dynamics among 19th century Americans. I mean, it's pivotal to help us understand our place and our role within the faith that we grew up in. And I think this memoir becomes one more contribution to that.
Fantastic. You know, Troy, I've been following you and all of your work for years. I've been a big fan of yours for years, and I never knew that you had this connection with D. Michael Quinn. So it's really fascinating to hear this story. I was just curious, when did you learn that Mike was gay?
It must have been close. I don't know that we really talked about it too much, but I think it must have been right before probably the eve of his book coming out and the press that he was doing around same-sex dynamics.
And what did that mean to you when you discovered that Mike was a gay man like you?
Yeah, well, I was scared. I was scared of it more than anything because, you know, because I recognized the trajectory of being gay would, you know, be a potentially would exile me from the faith tradition that I loved, from my family, from all those kind of promises. And so there was quite this sort of nervousness about it, but I bought the book anyway, and I dove in and I read it, and as I explored it, it helped dissipate a lot of the fear that I had about myself, who I was, and you know, and I developed a lot of courage through Mike, and his example to follow truth wherever it might be. I mean, he literally, you know, follows to his soul the old hymn, to do what is right and let the consequence follow. And so much of what Mike was pursuing, you know, he was but so many times, you know, told, stop, don't follow this path, don't publish, don't do this. But his own personal integrity drove him forward, no matter what the consequences were. And ultimately, the consequence would be exile from his faith. And that is on one hand, it does seem like a tragic story, but for me, it was a triumphant story. It was a story of personal integrity and strength and valor and you know, and it gave me the courage to, you know, it was one of those factors that gave me the courage to come out ultimately.
Yeah, that's wonderful. This is kind of a great segue to go into talking about, you know, Mike's courage to follow the truth and to publish what he found, to go into asking Sara, who is a member of the Mormon Studies community, again, who studies theological and gender studies, to talk about what Mike's work has meant to the Mormon Studies community. And maybe talk, Sara, do you think that his memoir even will further contribute to that?
I absolutely do. I think the memoir captures what Troy was just talking about, Mike's commitment to truth telling. And I think you see in his life story the high stakes of storytelling in terms of identity, both storytelling about his own life and who he was, and also storytelling about the church community. And he he understood and also experienced just how high the stakes were for the church in trying to hide particular parts of its past in order to fit in and be seen as mainstream by its religious peers in American culture. And I think that Mike felt it was important for the church to embrace its distinct identity and all of its history. And I think that, you know, Troy mentioned his footnotes, and we all love his footnotes, but they serve as paths for the rest of us to follow in our own research as we think about issues of power and authority and identity. And so I think he's just been an important leader for the Mormon studies community in that way.
Yeah, I talking about the footnotes, which is something that D. Michael Quinn is famous for. Looking at his footnotes, and I feel like that was exactly kind of like breadcrumbs, if you will, Sarah, for other historians to come along if they want to know what sources to look at and where to go to dig deeper. It's all there in his footnotes, and I really think he put those all there for all of us who would follow, who want to pursue and write more about the topics that he was exploring.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can have a discussion now with all of us about the memoir. I just wanted to ask all of you, and speak up as you'd like, but what in the memoir was surprising or revelatory to you?
Oh, I'll happily jump in there. I discovered that Mike's first gay kiss was with Connell Rocky O'Donovan, who is a beloved elder in the LGBT community, and he is just a true icon and a just wonderfully warm human, and also a notable historian of himself. And I just loved that. I loved that Mike's first intimate experience was with someone so beautiful. It made me feel, I was really touched by that. And I think overall, what I love about this book is that it's telling two stories about Mike's spiritual and sexual awakening, and the two are intertwined together. They're not separate. And I think that's something really important for us as humans to understand, how our sexuality and how our spirituality are tied together. And it is this primal yearning to connect with something and someone beyond ourselves. And one does not need to be suppressed for the other to flourish. And I think if we could all just glean that truth, I think we Latter-day Saints, we would be a much healthier and much happier people, recognizing how integral these two aspects of ourselves are to being a whole person. And watching Mike struggle with this in this effort to reconcile it is both inspiring and heart-wrenching, because it is the experience of so many gay LGBT Latter-day Saints who are working through these seemingly contradictions. And I think the discovery for me as I'm reading it is like, they're not a contradiction. They're one and the same, and they can't be separated from who we are as a people, as a human.
Moshe, do you think you knew your dad better than any of us, of course, as his son? Do you think that was kind of your dad's mission in life, what Troy just expressed?
No, I think that's really beautiful, Troy. And I mean, it really resonates with me for sure. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I agree. Like, my sense of my father is that you can't disentangle, and not that you would even want to disentangle like these strands of identity. And I think that the memoir really does bear this out in some very persuasive and very memorable ways. His spiritual awakening, his intellectual awakening, his faith awakening, and they're all part of the same thing. You could even say just different facets of who he was. what's interesting there to me, like when I think about that, though, is thinking about like the element of repression, because for him, like he really felt that there were there were conflicts, inevitable and torturous conflicts there. His sexuality was something that was getting potentially in the way of his faith mission and his spiritual awakening. And I think ultimately, like it isn't, right? I mean, it wasn't getting in the way, or should not have gotten in the way. And it really, like, I think empowers his spiritual awakening and his faith mission. But he didn't see it that way. And so there was, for him, a tragic element there, because he wasn't able to, with time and culture, and upbringing, he wasn't able to see that. I heard that cats are okay to sort of introduce in the stream of things here.
Mhm.
So if it seems like I'm sort of like wiggling, there's a cat I'm petting.
We love cats. Sara often has a cat come into her screen, so we welcome cats here.
Oh, pretty. So yeah, so that's an interesting aspect. Like when you're speaking to that point, Troy, which I think is true, it also just has me thinking of what our father saw as a tragedy in his life, how he couldn't be himself, how he had to deny himself in a really deep and profound way in order to pursue what he thought was best, for his life.
Yeah. So Moshe, I have that same question for you. Again, you knew your dad the best of all of us, but what was surprising for you? Maybe something you didn't know about your dad, or something that was revelatory to you in the memoir?
Well, it's interesting, and this is just a sliver, but for whatever reason, what comes to me as being like really like a perspective shift, as I've read the memoirs, is this issue of class, and how our father is just so consistent in portraying himself as working class and coming from a working class background, and that's a major theme in this memoir. And it's nothing that I would have expected, because whenever I think about like my family background and class, I think of us as being middle class, or maybe like a little low-ish on the rung of middle class, but still like a middle class family. And I think that that's true in a lot of ways. And it's been interesting to me to be reading the memoirs and see it really as, in a sense, a story of a working class boy who goes places, who does something, who has his journey and his calling. But it's informed by his being a working class boy. And even as an older man and growing into his life, apparently he saw himself as a working class individual. And his experiences are informed by that background. And that was just very interesting to me, and very surprising, because it was just very different from my perception of him and my perception of us. And of course, I know it's like not our family as much as his background that he is speaking to. But with that said, it's given me a lot of interesting insights into my life and into my upbringing with him. Where I'm appreciating in a lot of ways that I never really saw or was aware of before, that there are maybe, I don't know, not to be essentialist about class, but there are maybe some strands of that story that was important to him that I can recognize now in my being raised by him and in my experiences, as his son in this world and in this society. So that was pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, that was interesting to me too, as and the editor and lead annotator of the book, that theme of his emphasizing he came from a working class background. Even to there's one incident with your mother when he and your mother were married, and they visit a neighborhood that's more of a working class neighborhood at one point. And I can't remember if your mom was a little bit disparaging, or she said something, and Mike said, "Look, this is my background. This is me. This is who I am." And your mom even was kind of surprised to learn that, because I think by the time, your mom met him, and of course, by the time you came along, so he was a rising star in the Mormon studies community. He was working for the LDS Church History Department for Leonard Arrington, a graduate student. And then, of course, when you came along, I think he was completing his PhD at Yale. So it was probably surprising for many of us to learn that his working class identity was so important to him, and that he saw that as such an important part of his identity.
Yeah, and I really loved it. Like I find that aspect of the story somehow profound and moving and deeply illuminating. I think just like really like casts a lot in a new and really useful light as far as his life story goes. And it makes sense to me that he goes back to this again and again throughout the memoir. You know, it just makes sense to me that this is a meaningful through line for him. And I get it. I get why it was. I think it enriched him, and he drew a lot of strength, I think, you know, from that sense of his identity.
Absolutely. I would say he was always kind of sticking up for the underdog or the oppressed, right? His heart always went that direction. Sara, what about you? You had spoken about Mike at this conference. You had written September 6th and the Struggle for the Soul of Mormonism. But was there anything new that you discovered through reading the memoir, either about Mike or about 20th century Mormon history itself?
I think one of the things that really struck me in reading the memoir is tied to something that Troy was talking about with Mike's spirituality. I think in the memoir, you see the pain that came from an institution that insisted that a faith life could only look one particular way. And you can see the pain that came from his excommunication. But you also see that his faith life continued beyond his excommunication, and that he had a rich spirituality throughout his life. And can I read just a quick passage that really struck me? He said, "Baptism cannot give you a relationship with God, and excommunication cannot take it away. Neither has eternal significance unless sealed by the Holy Spirit of promise. I can only trust in God's love and in my relationship with God." And so I think part of what you can see in his memoir, and is true of 20th century Mormonism, is that there are many different ways of leading a faithful life. And even as the institution continued to insist that there was one, people engaged their faith in multiple ways.
Yeah, that was a beautiful theme that came out. One of the very moving themes in that passage you read. There are many like that were very moving, moved me to tears, and others who have read those too have really been moving for folks. So I think that's absolutely right on. Who do you think should read this book? Asking all of you, who will enjoy, who will gain from, who will gain new insights, who will enjoy reading it?
Well, first off, everybody who knows and loves Mike is going to treasure it. But I think anybody who has a seeker's spirit, anybody who desires to go on a intellectual, spiritual, emotional quest of themselves, I think in so many ways, you know, there is this, you know, Mike embodies this kind of classic hero's journey, and there is this beautiful kind of story that he tells. Pull up here. He tells a story about the film that's based on the book from Umberto Eco called The Name of the Rose, and he recites a conversation between a Franciscan friar and a young protege, and I guess they're going through some church manuscripts, and which I'm sure that Mike related to quite well. And the protege asks if the historical church documents are too precious and fragile to be examined. And the friar responds, "Oh, no, it's the opposite." He goes, "It's because they contain a wisdom that is different from ours, and ideas could encourage us to doubt the infallibility of God's words." And I think, you know, we've got this faith tradition that is founded by a curious farm boy seeking further light and wisdom. And this faith generates seekers who are not satisfied with these rote answers of obedience. And I think anybody who feels that fire lit within their souls to ask, to really, truly seek, is going to find so much pleasure and joy and heartache in reading this book. And I'm excited that it's going to be available to people.
Great. Sara, Moshe, who should read this book?
I have a hard time saying that. I think all people will have something to learn from this book. I think Mike was just so thoughtful and careful about everything that he was doing, and was constantly asking questions about the choices that he was making, and just writes about his journey of finding himself in such beautiful ways. So I think everybody should read this book.
Yeah, in a way, I was going to say, like, maybe I'm too close to like have a good sense, who should read this book. But I think what Sara said right now is really what's, in my heart, as far as this question goes. I think that this is it's a remarkable story of being one particular person in a set of fascinating circumstances, very complex circumstances, who moved through life as best as he could, who encountered challenges and contradictions and struggled with what he saw or what he thought were contradictions, to make his life the best version that it could be, living by his values and pursuing his truth and pursuing his love, his love for God, his love for community, his love for people, and having a hard time of it, as we all do. And something is really, truly glorious in that, just like really like seeing a life rendered very candidly, warts and all, as he would say, rendering his life, in that way as he approached history, he approached his own memoir. And there's something I think very moving and, edifying, but I think it's something that's just very moving, to go on that journey with him, to walk through the door that he's opening for us, to invite us into his journey, into his life, into his struggles, and be there with them, be present. And I think that there's a real gift when so much is offered, when so much is expressed, and so much is rendered and portrayed, so much that is very private. I think there's a real gift in having the opportunity to be so close and so intimate with somebody in their own life, as they're telling it.
Thank you. Thanks for all of your thoughts. I just wanted to briefly share again how honored I have been, not only to Moshe and your sisters for bringing the manuscript to Signature Books and asking us and entrusting us with publishing it, but also working closely with you, Moshe, in editing the book and working with a team of annotators, one of whom was Connell O'Donovan, by the way, to annotate this book so that people can really have a sense of the context. And if there are names or events or things like that come up that 21st century readers might not be familiar with, they will be able to look at these annotations. And as I've been working on this manuscript with you, Moshe, I've often been thinking of Michael and hoping that he would be pleased with what we're doing and in bringing his words and his life to light and sharing it with the world. So again, I thank you, Moshe, for bringing it to us. I thank you, Sara and Troy, for reading it and sharing your thoughts about it. And we can't wait to bring this to the world now through all of our readers. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yes, thank you.